My name is Jessica Teague with the Department of Pesticide Regulations Enforcement Branch in the Licensing and Certification Program, and this presentation is a regulations update on the certification and training of pesticide applicators, or C&T regulations. A few presentation goals. The intent of this presentation is to communicate new information. Requested clarifications may be asked through a follow-up email, which I will go over at the end of this presentation. And then comments on information presented should be submitted during the official public comment period, which is scheduled for May 2022. This is the agenda for the presentation today. First, I'll discuss some background information about the certification and training regulations. Then we'll give you an overview of the key changes, then discuss those key changes in detail, a little bit of a timeline as to when these certification and training regulations become effective, and then I'll discuss what's next. So to start, we wanted to provide some background information about the certification and training regulations and how these came to be. US EPA has revised Title 40 Code of Federal Regulations Part 171, which throughout the presentation I will refer to as 40 CFR Part 171 or just 40 CFR. The revisions to 40 CFR Part 171 set stronger standards for people who apply restricted use pesticides, or commonly known as RUPs. 40 CFR Part 171 details the minimum requirements state agencies who certify applicators of RUPs must meet. In California, state restricted materials, commonly known as RMs, include RUPs. Due to California's unique regulatory framework, the revisions to 40 CFR impact users of both RMs and general use pesticides. California must meet the revised standards of 40 CFR Part 171 set by US EPA. Some additional background about Title 40 Code of Federal Regulations. The original 40 CFR Part 171 was published by US EPA on October 9th, 1974. Then in 2017, US EPA published the revisions to 40 CFR Part 171. Changes to DPR's pesticide applicator certification program and regulations are being made to meet these revised standards. Compliance with the revised US EPA standards is required. And prior to these 2017 revisions of 40 CFR, they had not undergone substantial review and revision since 1974. So that's approximately 43 years that these regulations have not been revised. DPR has worked extensively to ensure California's pesticide applicator certification program meets the revisions of 40 CFR Part 171. In order for California to remain in compliance, US EPA must review and approve all aspects of DPR's regulatory revisions made to comply with 40 CFR. In January 2022, DPR began the final stages of this review and approval process with US EPA, after US EPA's approximately 15-month review. Receiving approval from US EPA is an important part to ensure information provided to licensees and stakeholders affected by these revisions is accurate and official. DPR's regulatory revisions to comply with 40 CFR Part 171 are now in the final stage of review with US EPA. This is an overview of the key changes that will be discussed in this presentation. The first is going to be new commercial applicator fumigant categories. The second is the alignment of commercial applicator categories with federal categories and competencies. The third is the expansion of private applicator competencies. The fourth is a new private applicator burrowing vertebrate pest certificate option. The fifth is going to be the limitation of fumigant activities conducted under a private applicator certificate. The sixth is an amendment to the Title III California Code of Regulations private applicator definition concerning householders. And then Kayla Suprenant will discuss continuing education standards and changes to those. And then Ann Schaffner will discuss important miscellaneous changes, such as a minimum age requirement and handler training topics. So to begin, I will discuss the new commercial applicator fumigant categories. The first is going to be the new soil fumigation category. The revised 40 CFR includes a soil fumigation category for commercial applicators, including a category description and competency standards. This category for commercial applicators was not detailed in the original 1974 40 CFR. DPR currently has a commercial applicator field fumigation subcategory, which is subcategory O. The competency standards of this current subcategory do not align with the competency standards detailed in the federal soil fumigation category. As a result of this, DPR is adopting a new soil fumigation category, which will be known as Category L, and DPR is eliminating the existing field fumigation subcategory O. This is a category description for the new soil fumigation category L. This will be for individuals who perform pest control using a pesticide labeled as a fumigant to control soil pests in sites including fields, forests, golf courses, greenhouses, and individual tree or vine hole sites. This category does not include the use of non-soil fumigant products. So what is the impact of the addition of this new soil fumigation category for commercial applicators? All commercial applicators conducting soil fumigation activities must at minimum meet the competency standards of 40 CFR. Because DPR's current field fumigation subcategory does not meet the new federal soil fumigation competency standards, it is being replaced by the new Category L soil fumigation. All commercial applicators currently conducting soil fumigation activities under the field fumigation subcategory and or an existing DPR category or subcategory, for example, Category D, must take the new soil fumigation Category L examination to remain in compliance with the revised standards. The Category L soil fumigation examination must be taken by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance upon the effective date of the regulations. And I will discuss this January 1st, 2024 date in more detail later. The field fumigation subcategory is also inactive and ineligible for renewal starting this date. The next topic is going to be a new non-soil fumigation category. The revised 40 CFR Part 171 includes a non-soil fumigation category for commercial applicators, including a category description and competency standards. This category for commercial applicators was also not detailed in the original 1974 40 CFR. DPR does not currently have a non-soil fumigation category for commercial applicators. DPR is adopting this non-soil fumigation category for commercial applicators. Going forward, this will be known as Category M. Commercial applicators currently or intending to conduct any non-soil fumigation activities must obtain this category. This is a category description for the new non-soil fumigation Category M. This will be for individuals who perform pest control using a pesticide labeled as a fumigant to fumigate enclosed areas, including tarpaulin-covered structures and commodities, vaults, chambers, greenhouses, vans, boxcars, ships, planes, and vehicles which contain agricultural commodities for post-harvest fumigation or non-food, non-feed materials, including but not limited to pallets, dunnage, furniture, burlap bags, planting medium, including potting soil and potting mix, and wine barrels and corks. Individuals will also need this if they fumigate pest burrows in sites, including but not limited to fields, right-of-ways, ditches, landscaping, and equipment yards. And this category is also required if individuals fumigate sewer lines, in-service utility poles, or other fumigations not covered by the new Category L soil fumigation category. This category does not include structural pest control required to be licensed under Chapter 14 of Division 3 of the Business and Professions Code. So what is the impact to our commercial applicators with the addition of this new non-soil fumigation category? All commercial applicators conducting non-soil fumigation activities must obtain the new non-soil fumigation category, which is Category M. The Category M non-soil fumigation examination must be taken by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance upon the effective date of the regulations. The next key change is going to be the alignment of commercial applicator categories with federal categories and competencies. This is a list of the federal categories for commercial applicators. They include agricultural pest control, both crop and livestock, forest pest control, ornamental and turf pest control, seed treatment, aquatic pest control, right-of-way pest control, industrial, institutional, and structural pest control, public health pest control, regulatory pest control, demonstration and research, soil fumigation, non-soil fumigation, and aerial pest control. As you can see from the previous slide, there are subcategories that DPR currently holds that are not included in the federal categories. 40 CFR does not include a description of or competencies for the subcategories of sewer line root control, wood preservation, anti-fouling tributylin, field fumigation, or microbial pest control that are currently maintained by DPR for commercial applicators. These subcategories include fumigant use activities and were created to address specific and specialized use situations. The revised 40 CFR now includes fumigant categories for commercial applicators. As a result, DPR is eliminating these existing subcategories, including the field fumigation subcategory I discussed previously, to align all DPR commercial applicator categories with those detailed in 40 CFR. Upon implementation of the regulations, all existing DPR subcategories will be invalid and ineligible for initial certification or renewal. This is again a list of the subcategories that will be eliminated. The first is sewer line root control, which is currently subcategory N. The next is wood preservation, which is currently subcategory L. The next is anti-fouling tributylin, currently subcategory M, followed by microbial pest control, subcategory P, and then as I previously discussed, the field fumigation subcategory O. If you hold one or more of these subcategories, you will need to obtain the appropriate commercial applicator fumigant category and or appropriate categories consistent with the revised regulations. The appropriate examinations to obtain the correct categories must be taken by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance upon the effective date of the regulations. So we wanted to provide you of an example of what this might look like to a commercial applicator whose subcategory has been eliminated. So for example, you are a commercial applicator who uses the fumigant sulfur dioxide to treat wine barrels and corks used in wine production. You also occasionally apply pesticides to shrubs and flowers in order to control ants in the landscape. You currently hold a qualified applicator certificate in subcategory P, microbial pest control, and category B, landscape maintenance. So what would this individual need to do in order to remain in compliance? In order to remain in compliance with the revised regulatory requirements and continue conducting these pest control activities, this individual would need to take and pass the new commercial applicator non-soil fumigation examination at or before January 1st, 2024. This will allow this individual to continue treating wine barrels and corks using the fumigant product sulfur dioxide. And they will also need to maintain through continuing education hours for their category B and new category M QAC certificate. So what is the impact of this to our commercial applicator population? All commercial applicators who currently hold a subcategory in sewer line root control, wood preservation, anti-fouling tributylin, and or microbial pest control must obtain the appropriate commercial applicator categories consistent with DPR's revised commercial applicator regulations. All existing commercial applicator subcategories will be invalid and ineligible for renewal on January 1st, 2024. If applicable, the necessary examinations must be taken by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance upon the effective date of the regulations. As a reminder, these revisions will align all of DPR's commercial applicator categories with those detailed in the revised 40 CFR Part 171. The next key change I will discuss is the expansion of private applicator competencies. The revised 40 CFR Part 171 has expanded the competency standards for the private applicator certificate, also known as PAC examination initial. So this is the initial examination that private applicators must take to first obtain their certificate. So the PAC initial examinations previously administered for certification do not meet the revised competency standards detailed in 40 CFR. All PAC holders must meet the competency standards detailed in 40 CFR. So as a result of this, all existing PAC holders must take and pass a revised PAC initial examination, which includes the revised competency standards prior to the expiration of their certificate. Our PAC holders renew on a 3-year basis, so this will be a phased-in approach, and this requirement will need to be met prior to the expiration of their certificate. So what is the impact of this to our private applicators? All private applicators currently certified will need to take the revised PAC initial examination that includes the revised competency standards. Taking this examination is not optional. Renewing through continuing education will not be an option until an individual has taken and passed the revised PAC initial examination that includes these revised competency standards. As I stated previously, this will be required at a private applicator's time of renewal and will occur over a 3-year period as follows. By January 1st, 2024, PAC holders with last names beginning with R through Z must meet this requirement. By January 1st, 2025, PAC holders with last names beginning with A through H must meet this requirement. And then by January 1st, 2026, PAC holders with last names beginning with I through Q must meet this requirement. Beginning in fall 2022, the new exam will be available for applicants to meet the new competencies. So if an individual takes this new exam after fall 2022, they will have met the new requirement. The next key change is going to be a new private applicator burrowing vertebrate pest certificate option. The revised 40 CFR Part 171 requires private applicators using fumigants to be certified in fumigant use. The revised 40 CFR allows states to adopt a non-soil and/or soil fumigation category for private applicators. DPR is adopting a new certificate option for private applicators, which will be the burrowing vertebrate pest fumigation certificate option. This certificate option allows PAC holders to use fumigants labeled for the control of burrowing vertebrate pests. All other fumigant activities will require a private applicator to obtain a commercial applicator certification in the appropriate categories, which would be either non-soil or soil fumigation. This ensures that individuals using fumigant products are knowledgeable in the safe and effective use of these hazardous products. So what is the impact to our private applicators with the addition of this new certificate option? All private applicators using fumigant products will need to obtain the appropriate certifications for their fumigant use activities upon the implementation of the proposed regulations. Private applicators using fumigants labeled for the control of burrowing vertebrate pests may obtain the new private applicator certificate option in burrowing vertebrate pest control. This certificate must be obtained by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance. Private applicators who intend to use any other type of fumigant product other than those labeled for the control of burrowing vertebrate pests must obtain a commercial applicator certificate in the appropriate fumigant use categories. This must also be obtained by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance. An important clarification to make about the private applicator examinations I discussed is that if you are a PAC holder who will be applying to obtain the burrowing vertebrate pest fumigation certificate option, but your existing PAC expires after the implementation date of the proposed regulations, so that would be after January 1st, 2024, you are required to take and pass the revised PAC practical knowledge examination, that's the initial examination I discussed, which includes the revised competencies, at or before obtaining the new private applicator burrowing vertebrate pest fumigation certificate option. This requirement applies regardless of when your existing PAC expires. The next key change to discuss is going to be the limitation of fumigant activities conducted under a private applicator certificate. So as I just mentioned, the fumigation used by private applicators will be limited to the burrowing vertebrate pest certificate option. This limitation is consistent with the types of fumigant activities most commonly conducted by private applicator certificate holders in California. All other fumigant use by PAC holders will require a commercial applicator certificate in the appropriate categories. So what is the impact of this to our private applicators? All private applicators who intend to use any other type of fumigant product other than those labeled for the control of burrowing vertebrate pests must obtain a commercial applicator certificate in the appropriate fumigant use categories. This will be the commercial applicator soil fumigation category, category L, and or the non-soil fumigation category M. This commercial applicator certificate must be obtained by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance. The final topic I will discuss today is going to be an amendment to the Title III California Code of Regulations private applicator definition concerning householders. US EPA has requested that DPR align California's private applicator definition with the federal private applicator definition. As a result of this, the definition of householder is being removed from the Title III California Code of Regulations private applicator definition. Upon the effective date of the regulations, January 1st, 2024, individuals who currently conduct householder activities under a private applicator certificate will be required to obtain a commercial applicator license or certificate with the appropriate categories if they intend to continue householder activities. So what is the impact of this to our private applicators? Private applicators who currently conduct householder activities under a PAC must obtain a commercial applicator license or certificate in the appropriate use categories based on application setting. This commercial applicator certificate must be obtained by January 1st, 2024 in order to remain in compliance. And the photo at the bottom of the screen is depicting the subsection B that will be removed from the private applicator definition, which pertains to householders. And now I will pass it on to Kayla Suprenant to discuss continuing education standards.
My name is Kayla Suprenant, and I'm an analyst with the licensing program. I will be going over the changes made to DPR's continuing education program. US EPA requires certifying agencies who allow the option for applicators to recertify through continuing education, like DPR, to maintain recertification programs that meet the revised federal standards. The changes to DPRC program we will discuss are to ensure we meet US EPA standard for quantity, content, and quality of approved CE courses used for recertification of pesticide licenses. CE ensures competency when applying pesticides, is required for license renewal, and is in lieu of re-examination. The improvements to DPR's recertification program also promote a reduction in occupational pesticide exposure and related illnesses and ensure pesticide applicators are properly making applications so as not to cause unreasonable adverse effects to applicators, workers, the public, or the environment. The first change we will cover are the two new CE course applications. These applications will be replacing the currently used applications. The first application I will talk about is the new in-person course application. Requests for approval of in-person courses must be made on the new in-person continuing education approval request application form and submitted to DPR through US mail at least 30 days before the course date. Each CE approval request for in-person courses must include a $45 fee and a comprehensive agenda that provides a description of the course, titles of each presentation, main points of each presentation, start and end time for each presentation, as well as total course length, the CE categories being requested for each presentation, and the name and affiliation of each speaker. For multi-day courses, which are courses that occur over 2 or more days, sponsors will be required to submit an application, comprehensive agenda, and $45 fee for each day of the course. The regulatory package includes an update to courses that have concurrent sessions or presentations. Concurrent sessions are 2 or more separate presentations occurring at the same time as another presentation, but in different locations of the course site. Course sponsors must submit an application, agenda, and $45 fee for each presentation that occurs concurrently with another. Each concurrent presentation will be reviewed independently and accredited hours specific to each topic. In addition to separate applications, sponsors must include a description of how they will track individual attendance during the concurrent sessions. The second new application that we will be implementing is the interactive online and webinar course application. An important new requirement for this application is that the submission time has increased from 30 days to 60 days. This change is to ensure that course sponsors have sufficient time to get their application reviewed, communicate with DPR if clarification is needed, and so that courses are approved and can be advertised before the course date. With the addition of the approval requirements described in the coming slides, it is anticipated that review of courses and communication with sponsors to ensure all requirements are sufficiently met will take longer. Throughout 2020 and 2021, DPR observed that online and webinar courses required an additional level of communication with sponsors to ensure all requirements had been met. For online courses, sponsors will need to provide a comprehensive course syllabus, which provides a detailed outline of the course. The syllabus must contain the learning objectives for the course, amount of time allocated to each learning objective, and the CE categories being requested. Additionally, DPR must be provided access to the course so that we can view the course as if we were an attendee. This access must allow DPR review of the entire course at the time of application submittal, as well as access once the course is available for attendees. For webinar courses, the sponsor must submit a comprehensive agenda that includes a description of the course, title of each presentation, main points of each presentation, start and end times for each presentation, the CE categories being requested, name and affiliation of each speaker, and a link or login for the ability to attend the course when it occurs. Webinar course sponsors must provide DPR with an explanation of how they will check attendee identification. Acceptable formats for checking ID are by either one, a means of visually observing the attendee throughout the duration of the course, such as web cameras or proctored locations, or two, using a verification of fraud statement that attendees are required to agree to prior to starting the course. Online courses must include features for monitoring and ensuring attendance and participation, such as random pop-up questions, checkboxes, or key codes that must be responded to by the participant. Each hour must include at least 3 responses by each participant. The courses must have a way to prevent attendee from fast-forwarding through any portion of the course or participating in more than one course simultaneously. Courses must have the ability to timestamp when the attendee starts the course, completes the course, and total time spent in the course. This attendance information must be recorded and retained for the required 3 years. Attendees must also be provided a unique username and password to access the course. And for courses longer than 1 hour, a minimum 5-question quiz must occur every hour of the course. And upon conclusion of the course, a minimum 10-question final exam must be given. All online and webinar courses must include quiz questions and a final exam. The questions must be directly derived from course content. Questions must be in multiple choice format with 1 correct answer and at least 2 plausible but incorrect options, and must not contain all of the above, none of the above, or any all-inclusive response options. For online courses specifically, all quizzes must be passed with a score of 70% or greater before the attendee is allowed to advance in the course. For both webinar and the online courses, the final exam must be passed with a score of 70% or greater before a course completion certificate may be issued to the attendee. If the course sponsor allows the option to retake quizzes and final exams, different versions of the quiz and final exam must be available for retest. Different versions can include presenting new questions to the attendee or by varying the order of questions and answers each time the exam is taken. All possible quiz and exam questions must be submitted to DPR for review with the application and agenda. Lastly, online and webinar courses approved in the preceding year must also meet the following requirements for approval. Course content must be updated yearly to ensure the most current pest management information is being presented, and contain quiz and exam questions different from any questions used in previous year's approval. In other words, quiz and final exam questions must be updated yearly. DPR may deny any online or webinar course that does not meet the requirements. Previously denied courses must be revised and resubmitted with a new application, agenda, and $45 fee before being reconsidered for approval. Before making the determination as to whether a submitted application meets the criteria for approval, DPR may request more information regarding how the course content meets the provisions of Division 6 of the Food and Agricultural Code, meaning DPR can request clarifying information to ensure that courses and topics are in the context of pesticides and/or pest management, and information about how the course meets all requirements for CE credit. If we determine the course does not meet the criteria for approval, DPR may deny the course or approve the course for fewer hours than requested. DPR may audit courses given by any course sponsor and may revoke approval of CE hours for a course when the course did not follow the approved agenda or syllabus or covered false or misleading information, the course sponsor violated the Food and Ag Code in connection with that course, or if the course sponsor violated any provisions of the Food and Ag Code or regulations adopted pursuant to that division in connection with the audited course. Two changes included in the regulation package to make note of are that courses cannot exceed 8 hours per day, which includes online courses, and courses will not be approved for CE hours during poster or vendor displays, questions and answer sessions, panel discussions, formal examinations or testing, excluding review questions included as part of the presentation, or break periods. These changes best ensure that attendance matches the time spent learning and that the course can be successfully completed within a reasonable time frame. Additionally, the 8-hour course requirement is consistent with the average day of hours a full-time employee works on a typical day. Another change in the C&T regulations is that correspondence or text-based courses will no longer be approved. Due to the nature of correspondence courses, it is difficult to verify that an attendee has successfully read and completed the entirety of a course, which allows for individuals to skip through reading course content completely. Additionally, many of the correspondence courses we receive are longer than 8 hours. Next, we will cover updates to sponsor requirements. All course sponsors must ensure that the information used for advertising courses is true and not misleading, including agenda topics and the number of approved hours. Sponsors must also ensure course instructors, speakers, and course content developers are competent and knowledgeable in the subject matter. Lastly, sponsors must verify an individual's successful completion of the course prior to issuing a record of course completion. At in-person courses, sponsors must confirm the identity of the license or certificate holder. Acceptable means of confirming identity are by checking an official government-issued photo ID or using a verification process that ensures an official government-issued photo ID has been checked. Sponsors must have sufficient resources for verifying and monitoring attendance and participation, including tracking when the attendee arrives and leaves the course and recording the CE hours earned within that time period, as well as notifying all attendees to minimize personal distractions, including the use of electronic devices. Additionally, instructors or speakers will not receive CE hours for time presenting or anytime they are not actively participating in the course as an attendee. It is important to know that course credit is given on a one-to-one basis, meaning 1 hour of course attendance and participation is equivalent to 1 hour of CE credit. Records of completion must only be given to attendees upon the conclusion of their participation in a course and must reflect the actual hours earned by each attendee. The last change I'm going to talk about is the requirement for course sponsors to submit attendance records to DPR. In addition to the current record-keeping requirements for sponsors to maintain their CE records for 3 years, as well as provide a record of course completion to each attendee, the sponsoring organization will now be required to submit their attendance records to DPR within 14 days of completion of the course. This information will be submitted over the internet using the department's website or via an electronic data file transfer process. At the time of submission, the sponsor will electronically attest that the records submitted are true and correct, reflect the CE hours earned and accredited to each attendee. These records must be submitted to DPR or the County Agricultural Commissioner's Office upon request. That concludes my overview of the C&T changes to the CE program.
Hello, my name is Ann Schaffner. I'm the Human Health Mitigation Program Manager in the Worker Health and Safety Branch. I'll be covering miscellaneous changes to the proposed certification and training regulatory package. The first of these changes are those to the minimum age requirements. Those applying for a commercial or private license or certificate must be at least 18 years old and must provide valid government-issued identification as proof of age and identity. Also, anyone under 18 years old cannot be allowed to handle a pesticide identified as a restricted material. This is in addition to the current restriction, which prohibits anyone under 18 years old from mixing or loading a pesticide that requires air-supplied respiratory protection, a closed system, or full-body chemical-resistant protective clothing. The next change include improved standards for direct supervision of non-certified applicators and also changes to handler training requirements. Commercial applicators that supervise non-certified applicators will have some additional responsibilities. These include having practical knowledge of the applicable requirements on pesticide labels, verifying and maintaining non-certified applicator training records, and providing site-specific instructions to non-certified applicators. Also, there will be some changes to the handler training requirements. These include expanding the training topics, which I'll talk about in more detail on the next slide, making records accessible to employees as well as to supervising certified applicators, and requiring trainers to be present throughout an entire training to respond to employee questions. The additional handler training topics include how to identify information on product labeling that is applicable to safe pesticide use, such as label required PPE and precautionary statements about human health hazards. That anyone under 18 years old cannot handle a pesticide identified as a restricted material. How to identify on the label if a product is a federal restricted use pesticide or California restricted material, and that such products may only be used by certified applicators or those under their supervision. Also, when a restricted use pesticide or California restricted material is used by a non-certified applicator, the training must cover the requirement for non-certified applicators to have immediate and direct communication with the supervising certified applicator, where on the label the physical presence of a certified applicator is required, and that the certified applicator is responsible for providing site-specific instructions prior to the pesticide use. This concludes the miscellaneous topic regulatory changes. Now I'll turn it over to Jessica again.
Thank you, Anne. So now that you've heard about all of the key changes discussed throughout this presentation, I'm going to take you through the C&T regulatory timeline. So beginning in May 2022, as I stated at the beginning of this presentation, these C&T regulatory changes are scheduled to be published for public comment. And then in July 2023, these C&T regulatory changes are scheduled to be approved and finalized by the Office of Administrative Law, also known as OAL. And this is a required regulatory process in California. And then approximately between July 2023 and January 2024, DPR will work to get commercial and private applicators in compliance with the new regulatory requirements. So that would include conducting a lot of outreach, as well as administering any examinations that individuals may need to meet these new regulatory requirements. And then, as you heard many times throughout the presentation, January 1st, 2024 is when these C&T regulatory changes do become effective. A little bit about compliance and a timeline for that. So January 1st, 2024 is when all commercial applicators must be in compliance. And then also private applicators with last names R through Z must be in compliance. And then in January 1st, 2025 is when private applicators with last names beginning with A through H must be in compliance. And then January 1st, 2026, private applicators with last names beginning with I through Q must be in compliance. So a little bit about what's next now that you've heard about these regulatory changes that are coming. The best way to get involved is to sign up for DPR's electronic mailing list. And that mailing list is called the Notice of Proposed and Final Decisions. You can find this mailing list on DPR's website at www.cdpr.ca.gov. If you sign up for this electronic mailing list, you will be notified when the public comment period for these regulations opens. So we highly encourage any interested stakeholders and licensees to sign up for this electronic mailing list. And then also we encourage you to participate in the public comment period once it begins, which is scheduled to begin May 2022. Any clarifications can be directed to Alicia Scott. She is a supervisor in our licensing and certification program, and her email is her name, alicia.scott@cdpr.ca.gov.